Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the digital content manager and Chicago Cubs reporter for the Marquee Sports Network. Please welcome Tony Andracki to the program. Tony, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Hey, doing well. It's great to be on again.
What's your evaluation of the Cubs offseason, first off?
A lot. I think that's really the way you look at it. I believe last I checked or last I knew, they had the most free agent signings of any team in Major League Baseball by a few. I think it was like 14 or 15, whatever they ended up with. So they obviously had a lot to do, and we knew that at the end of the 2021 season. Jed Hoyer said they were going to be active in free agency, and he was not kidding around. So they've done a bunch. Even before the lockout, we saw big moves in Marcus Stroman and Yan Gomes, which was, fills a huge need for the Cubs just in terms of that stability in the backup catcher spot. And then Clint Frazier, who could be the, big piece of this team moving forward, or at least this year. And then obviously since the lockout, it's a lot of depth pieces. Say Suzuki was a huge signing overall. A lot of veteran arms in the bullpen, a lot of young guys coming up like Ethan Roberts and stuff. So we'll see how those guys kind of mesh together. Some veteran starting pitching. And that's what this year's all going to be about, is just pitching depth overall. And the Cubs have a lot of it. They gained a lot of it this offseason. And they just have some intriguing guys now in the position player group as well. So it's been a busy offseason, which is interesting given that there was a 99-day lockout in there. Overall, the Cubs, I think, have added just a ton of depth to this roster.
Were you surprised at how active they were?
Yes and no. Definitely surprised in just how many names we saw. But not surprised when you sit back and think about it and you have the benefit of hindsight to realize like, oh, that guy makes sense. Oh, that guy makes sense. That guy makes sense. And then just especially as you see how injuries come out, Adbert Alzolay is obviously unavailable for probably the first couple months of the season. We're not 100% sure what his timeline will be. It turned out that Wade Miley, an offseason acquisition, is not available. But then Steven Brault, he was a signing. He was originally on a big league deal, came in with a triceps injury, went to a minor league deal. Cubs still needed more pitching after that. Cody Hoyer was going to be a big part of the bullpen, had Tommy John during the lockout. So it's like all these things, they kind of had to backfill on the fly. But I think we always knew they were going to sign a free agent or just add to the shortstop depth in general. And so to being able to do that with Andrelton Simmons and then having a guy like Jonathan VR, left-handed bat, switch hitting bat, but just can hit left-handed on a very right-handed heavy infield, can play all over. So really you look around and it's like all these moves make a lot of sense. And then coupled with the injury factor, I think they just have made even more sense. So definitely surprised by the sheer number of it, but not surprised because I think there's a fit for all of these guys.
What should all these moves prove to Cubs fans?
I think that this year is going to be an interesting year. I think there's so many different ways that this can play out. Like the Cubs wouldn't make these moves if they had zero intentions of competing this year. They do. Jed Hoyer has always said that. David Ross has always said that. They do obviously intend to compete. Now, apart from Stroman and Suzuki, there were no major long-term commitments a part of that. I think Yan Gomes' 2 years, guaranteed is one of the biggest deals that they obviously put out there. But, I think identifying core pieces is a big thing of this. And we'll see. Clint Frazier could certainly be that. Steven Brault's only 30 years old when he gets healthy. Some of these other relievers should have a few years left. Like Michael Givens is only 32. And so we'll see like how this all plays out. We'll see if these guys can become a part of the future. But it definitely signals to Cubs fans that the way the roster was after the trade deadline last year was not the way it's going to be moving forward. And it's not the way that Jed and Carter Hawkins and the rest of the Cubs front office would like it to be. So they added, all these veterans and if things don't work out, if things don't, if more injuries strike or, even with extra playoff spots, the Cubs aren't in the race the way they want to, a lot of these guys should fetch some interesting, an interesting market on the trade market. So just, there's a lot of different options they can go from here. I think just overall this season got a lot more interesting with so many of these new guys, particularly Stroman and Suzuki.
Is this a rebuild? A lot of people are confused. Is this still a rebuild based on all these moves that you're telling me about, or are they really going to compete? But what do you think about that?
So I don't think it's ever really been a rebuild. I think it's been more of whatever you want to call what the Yankees did in 2016, where they sold off Roldis Chapman and Andrew Miller, and that's what the Cubs wanted to do. They wanted to retool on the fly, maybe would be a better term, or just whatever it is. They always knew that, listen, we have a bunch of guys going towards free agency. We want to try to get something back for them. And by all accounts, it looks like they got a pretty nice haul for some of these players they traded away last year and really over just the last year and a half or so. So I think, but a lot of these prospects are far away from the big leagues. They're a couple years away. And, Brennan Davis and Caleb Killian are two guys who are knocking on the door. So in the sense of a rebuild, you're right. If it was a true rebuild, they wouldn't go out and sign all these veterans. They would give young guys opportunity. They would be, trying to see and evaluate things for the future. I think they're trying to do both things. They're trying to evaluate long-term pieces of the roster, but they're also trying to compete this year. And in this division, I don't see why not. The Brewers have an incredible starting rotation, but I think questions abound throughout the rest of the roster. The Cardinals did nothing this winter apart from signing Steven Matz, and the Reds sold off, signed Tommy Pham. That was about it. Pirates did absolutely nothing too. So with the extra extra playoff spots and just the division in general, I think the Cubs, there is a definite path to see how this could all click, come together, and they ended up in the playoffs. And again, if it doesn't, there's still pieces they could trade and acquire, younger prospects in return, and then still identify pieces for the future. So I think it's possible to do both things. And that's what I think they've always wanted to do all along.
Do you expect a playoff appearance right now?
I don't know. That's a good question. I definitely can see a possibility like I just talked about. I do think, admittedly, that quite a few things need to go right in order for that to happen. And we've already seen some of them go wrong, which is just, unfortunate byproduct of injuries. It happens. This Edward Alzolay injury is a little worrisome because he's had a lat injury in the past, and it cost him most of the 2018-2019 season. I forget which one it was, but it cost him about 3-4 months of that season. So it's going to cost him a bunch of time here again. He was going to be a huge part of the pitching staff. Same with Cody Hoyer. Then obviously, when the Cubs acquired Wade Miley and initially Stephen Brault, those pair of veteran lefties were going to be a part of the pitching staff as well. None of those four guys, we'll see probably in April. We definitely won't see Hoyer this year. Who knows about Alzolay or just when his timetable would be. Same with Brault. I mean, he's not even throwing yet, and Wade Miley is in the midst of a 10-day shutdown. So it'd be hard pressed to see him before May. So if more injuries strike, it would be a lot more difficult. But, in terms of the glass half full, the way I see a playoff appearance possible is I think David Ross is a fantastic manager who gets the most out of players, who rallies players and motivates players. And I think this offense was really interesting last year down the stretch with some of these guys. And you add to that Nick Madrigal, a healthy Nico Horner, Seiya Suzuki, see what Clint Frazier can be, see what Michael Hermosillo is. I think Frank Schwindel looks legit. I mean, this spring he's looked really good. His teammates, including Marcus Stroman, have raved about him. I just see this offense doesn't have the star power that Cubs offenses have had in the past, but you could see a level of success. They have a nice blend of contact and power and all these different things. And then the pitching staff as well. They have starter depth. They're obviously adding Stroman, pairing with Hendricks is huge. You get a rebound season from Hendricks. Steele takes another step, and this rotation can be pretty solid. But the bullpen is really interesting. They have veterans and some of these young guys like Ethan Roberts coming up and more on the way. And I think this bullpen can be a real weapon for this team. And then, like I said, the division is just not anything to really write home about. The Brewers are the clear favorites, I think, by most everybody's projections, but I think there's definitely a path for the Cubs to get there. And I think it's certainly realistic. I don't know if it will happen. I can't sit here and predict that or project what is going to play out. But if things break the way the Cubs are hoping they will, then yes, they will certainly be in the running.
Tony Andracki here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tony, are fans sleeping a bit too much in the offense? You mentioned a lot of these players, the lineup looking the way it is. We not expecting too much out of them. They could turn out and surprise everyone.
Yeah, I think because it's a bunch of unknowns, right? Like Seiya Suzuki's a great player, or was a great player in Japan, but he's a 27-year-old coming to play in the big leagues for the first time. And he has 20 spring training plate appearances total in games facing major league pitching. And some of those were even against, relievers who won't necessarily crack opening day rosters. So yeah, there's a big unknown, but to me with Suzuki in particular, I just think that he's been impressive. And I think all of his skills translate. And so that's a big bat that you add to the lineup. I think Frank Schwindel is real. I think, everything he's done is legit. I think he is out to prove people wrong, but I think what he did last year, I'm not necessarily expecting him to hit 320 or 330 for the rest of his career, but his blend of contact and speed contact and power is enticing. And I think it's legit. Patrick Wisdom obviously has power. With Jonathan VR here, then the Cubs could potentially form a platoon at third base as well, and match Wisdom up against the kind of pitchers they see. And yeah, you still got a veteran like Hayward who, a couple years ago in the 2020 shortened season had his best offensive year with the Cubs. So, he's obviously done it before, can do it again, work through a variety of injuries. I think he was on the IL 4 different times last year. So he's healthy now. See where some of these other guys, like obviously Ian Happ, really turned a corner down the stretch last year. If he can carry that over for the entire season, and then blend in with Nick Madrigal, who is, basically doesn't strike out and uses the whole field. And to see, I think Clint Frazier is a really underrated part of this roster because he was a top prospect, this phenom coming up. And if he gets playing time in the outfield and in at the DH spot, I think he's definitely a guy who can be a factor for maybe even in the middle of this lineup for this season. So yeah, I agree. I think that people are sleeping too much on it. They don't see the big names, but overall this offense has the type of diversity that Jed Hoyer and Theo Epstein have been talking about for the last few years, what they've been striving to do.
What excites you about their rotation?
I think just to use the word again, the diversity of it, because last year it was basically it was right-handers with the exception of Justin Steele. There was righty, and there were so many guys who had such a similar type of profile, like Zach Davies, Kyle Hendricks, Alec Mills are all pretty similar pitchers. And then Jake Arrieta and Trevor Williams come in and, they're not huge swing and miss guys and they weren't lighting up radar guns. And so you broke camp with 5 righties who had a somewhat similar profile and teams were able to game plan against it. Now we know how that kind of worked out for each individual guy, but I think I definitely believe in a bounce back for Kyle Hendricks. I absolutely think that what we saw from him, April was just a bad month, but then what we saw from him down the stretch was an aberration. And I think he's going to get a lot more back to the guy who was that middle of the season, who rattled off like 16 or 17 quality starts in a row. Like, I think that's who he is. Stroman is obviously legit. We've seen what he can be. He is a Cy Young contender. He is this really interesting person who has, this amazing like knowledge of the game, but also like, thinks about things a lot, and he's very cerebral and he can impact younger pitchers. I mean, Ethan Roberts has a tattoo of Stroman on his arm and stuff. So like, there's a lot of, he can have an impact, I believe, just even beyond the fact that he pitches. And then Justin Steele flashed his potential last year. So, I mean, you had him and Drew Smiley. We know what he can do. He's been around for a while and, stable veteran. But if Smiley's your number 4 starter, and then when Wade Miley gets back, he's maybe your number 4 or 5, like, that's a pretty good rotation. And then you got Keegan Thompson, Alec Mills as backups, a guy like Mark Leiter Jr. in the minors who has some swing and miss stuff. Like this is, I think, similar to the offense. It's a rotation that I think can surprise people. And I think also because of the defense, once Simmons gets back and is healthy, this defense can be really good, especially on ground balls. And they have quite a few ground ball pitchers between Hendricks and Stroman and Alec Mills. So I think it's a rotation that if everything clicks and everybody stays healthy, I believe will absolutely be in the top half in the National League and could be, pushing like top 5.
You think they may go to a 6-man rotation down the road if everybody gets healthy?
Yeah, it's possible. I think it's more likely that we'll see a 5-man rotation with guys like Mills or Keegan Thompson in the bullpen as like longer relief outings as piggyback options. But really, right now, the Cubs are taking it like a 2-week stretch at a time. They're envisioning the first 2 weeks of the regular season like it's the last 2 weeks of a normal spring training, given the shortened camp. They're not going to roll out relievers on a bunch of back-to-backs because I don't think any of these guys have worked a back-to-back yet. Even Jesse Chavez, who has like a rubber arm, none of these guys have pitched on back-to-back days. So that won't happen for the first couple of weeks of the season. The Cubs will need length. They'll need guys to be able to eat innings from the bullpen. And I think once Wade Miley returns, that'll still be the case. Even if we're talking about May, June, July, plus more injuries are going to happen. Guys are going to go on the IL. Again, we'll see when Alzolay might be able to return, but I don't see a 6-man rotation here this year. I think if they were going to do it last year, made a lot more sense, and they never really pulled the trigger on that until the end of the season. So I would project more of a 5-man rotation right now.
Who's your X factor in the rotation?
It's got to be Steele for me. He from the left side, a guy who can throw 95, who has kind of wipeout stuff. He's been working on his changeup and feeling really good about it. And then just listening to Stroman. I mean, he's been talking to Stroman a lot. He's obviously been able to learn from Hendricks the last couple of years. But I think everything that Stroman has been through in his career can help a guy like Steele so much. A guy who was a former top prospect, then was injured, kind of broke into the big leagues a little bit later in his career. But, 26, 27 years old, like he still has a lot of potential, a lot of innings left. And he did show down the stretch, I think, what he can do in the rotation. I think he's a guy that he has just a different repertoire than everybody else because of that velocity, because of the swing and miss stuff. Just the ability to like pitch with emotion and live off and thrive off of big moments. So yeah, he's the X factor for me. And I don't think he's somebody that a lot of people outside of, maybe Cubs fans or just Chicago in general are really picking to be a major force this year, but I think he will be. And I think he's going to be a guy who, as your number 2, number 3 starter, like is certainly as good as some of the 2 and 3 starters around the rest of the league.
What about the lineup too? Who are you really expecting to maybe break out or look forward to for this year?
Yeah, it goes back to Frazier, who I said before. I think Frazier, this could be the breakout that everybody's been thinking since he was this prospect coming out of high school. And, he was this top 10, top 20 prospect in the game. And as he was coming up through the Cleveland and Yankees system, I mean, he was the main piece in that Andrew Miller trade in 2016 that the Yankees had. And, he never really got an opportunity in New York because they had a crowded outfield. They were competing for a spot, but then just his head injuries and his, concussion issues and vertigo and vision issues that he had last year. He says he's healthy now. He feels good. He lost some weight and worked out hard in the offseason. He was joking the other day about wanting to steal 30 bases. And, he has good speed. He can do that, but his bat speed is legit. He has a great eye at the plate. He can whip that bat through the zone and keep it in the zone for a long time. And he has, gap to gap power, but also just home run power. So I think he's only 27. He's still under team control for 3 years. Like if he can make good on this, if he truly is healthy, he's definitely somebody to watch. That could be like a big part of this Cubs team moving forward if everything clicks like the way I think it could.
Tony Andracki still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tony, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, what do you like most about Seiya Suzuki?
His sense of humor. He's a great guy to get to know. And even with the language barrier, for that to come out, I think is really powerful. And it just kind of shows how strong his sense of humor is. So, he joking about getting beer poured on him from Wrigley Field if he keeps striking out by the fans. Or I was joking with him Monday it was about because he hit Justin Steele in live BP on a comebacker, and he had hit Cubs prospect Anderson Espinoza earlier in camp on a comebacker. And I was joking, are you looking forward to going to the regular season now? You won't have to face your own teammates and you won't have to risk hitting them with liners. And he just laughed and and he joked that, yes, he's definitely looking forward to that and how much, how bad he felt about it. But, he's able to portray that sense of humor, even with the language barrier, I think is powerful. And, just some of the interactions he's had with Cubs players. And you ask anybody, Ross, coaching staff, players about him, and their face just lights up. So he seems to be this really intriguing guy, both as a person with his personality, and then on the field, his I think his plate discipline, his like zone judgment this early in his big league career, just in spring training, I think it's looked really good. And his timing is there. Everything's up the middle of the last couple of days of spring training. His power is legit. I mean, the ball just jumped off his bat for those 2 homers, and he uses the whole field. So, I mean, he's a guy that, like, I've seen some of these projections for him that, like a high 300 on base percentage, like 370 range, over 500 for slugging. Like, that's the dream, but I don't think it's an outlandish dream. I think it's possible. I think he has that pop. He has speed. He's a good defender in right field, but he's patient and he doesn't strike out a lot. Like, he's a guy that once he settles in fully will probably have about as many walks as strikeouts. That's the scouting report on him, but that's also what I've seen from him in just a little bit of spring training so far. So we'll see, we'll see when he faces guys like Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff and stuff like that, but definitely a really interesting aspect. And he's here for 5 years. So somebody the Cubs fans can learn and grow with and begin to love and wear 27 jerseys all around Wrigleyville.
And Tony, before we finish up today, last question. How do you do taking BP at Wrigley?
Not so great. Yeah, my timing is not down, just like Saya's. It's been a little bit for me. I played last summer and did okay, but yeah, the results were not good. But I will say I didn't swing and miss at all. I did not get hurt, and I took batting practice on Wrigley Field. So, like, how upset can I be? So I had one liner towards the shortstop, so I got one ball out of the infield. But yeah, no, it was definitely a little disappointing. I did some of the Willie Mays Hayes pop it up into the batting cage and that turtle a couple of times and hit some choppers like back towards the pitcher and then started locking in a little bit. But yeah, wish I would have done a little bit better. I knew I wasn't going to put one out. I knew I wasn't going to hit the Budweiser sign in right field, but it was just an amazing experience to be there, to take batting practice, like this bucket list item to check off. So it was very cool.
Did you use the whole field at least?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I was trying to pull everything. I was a little bit ahead of stuff. I think I actually might have even chopped the ball foul because I was that far ahead of like my first swing. So yeah, I was my timing just wasn't where I wanted it to be. I'm normally a whole field, right center type of guy, and this was not. I was dead pull yesterday when I took swings. So bad approach. That's on me. I got to get better at that. I got to work on that, and I'll get in the cage and look at the film and see how it goes.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining me. Best wishes for this season. Should be a good one. Looking forward to the next time we chat too.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.